Yanely Espinal is the author of Mind Your Money and director of educational outreach at our favorite nonprofit, Next Gen Personal Finance. To her 58,000 YouTube followers, she is known as Miss Be Helpful, a Finlit channel she founded in 2015 that has racked up more than 4 million views. Yanely also hosts The Financially Inclined, a podcast about money lessons and living life your own way. Scott and I are super fans, so it is a thrill for us to have you on our pod. Welcome, Yanely.
Thank you so much, you guys. You're super fans. I'm super fans. Every time I work with teachers, they're like, 403 BYs is the best. And I'm like, you're right. They are the best. You
Oh
guys
my
are
gosh.
awesome.
I just love that we've teamed up. What an
Yeah.
amazing world that we could come
Mhm.
together and like
Why
both.
did it take us so long is the question. Sorry, guys.
Exactly. No, you are 100% right. Well, let's talk about your book, Mind
Cool.
Your Money. I found the first chapter riveting. In it, you detail growing up in New York City and the many money challenges you and your family faced. I want to read a section I found to be beautiful.
Yeah.
In Bushwick, Brooklyn, where I grew up, kids ran up and down the street while playing, and everyone yelled. You might have forgotten your keys, so you'd yell to the second floor for someone to toss them down. Or maybe it was time to go in for dinner, so your little brother yelled from up the block, Mammy said, stop playing and come inside to eat. It sounds idyllic, but there were many challenges. Can you share a little bit about your neighborhood and some of the financial challenges you faced?
Oh, absolutely. I love that part that you chose too, because it definitely paints the picture for like the backdrop of my upbringing. So I grew up in Bushwick, which, like you mentioned, it's a neighborhood in like the heart of Brooklyn, which is in the 90s and the 2000s, which is when I grew up there. The social fabric was very much Caribbean Americans. So first generation Caribbeans or recently immigrated Caribbeans who had just come from, countries like Jamaica, Haiti, Dominican Republic, Cuba, Puerto Rico, a lot of Black Caribbean countries and some Latin American Caribbean countries. So it was definitely a very specific culture. Some would say West Indian culture, Caribbean culture. It's definitely a certain type of food, a certain type of music, a certain type of sass. And I think that everybody was in that same struggle with an understanding that, hey, we all recently just got here. And so we're all trying to figure out how these systems work in New York, but larger, like in the US, financial systems, social systems, educational systems, and just trying to figure this out with not a lot of guidance, not a lot of money, not a lot of education, and certainly not a lot of social capital, no network really to rely on, which is, I think, one of the things I didn't realize early on was probably more important than money when you immigrate here is actually who you know, and knowing the right people who can help you to navigate certain systems and certain things, and especially processes. So it was a lot of fun. I remember, block parties would happen every day. Would shut down the street and get a DJ and just have a giant like a playpen, giant like blow up playpen. All the kids would jump up and down, and then there were days where we would just put the fire hydrant on blast, and somebody would find, the fire department would come and close it down. Somebody would always find a giant magnet, knock off the lock off of it, and bust open the fire hydrant, which we called the pump, not the fire hydrant. So blast the pump open, and everybody's kids would run up and down the block getting wet till the fire hydrant, was shut down, of course, again by the fire department. But these are the types of things that was just like quintessential Brooklyn growing up. And there was such an energy, a joy, but again, a struggle underlying all of that was like people not really talking about how hard it was not having the money that you needed and the resources to get things like, groceries, or to get access to school tuition, college tuition, to be able to pay medical bills, and things that just, again, didn't really come up, and I wasn't really aware of it. But now as an adult, I look back in hindsight, I'm like, oof, yes, people were really struggling.
Wow, you just painted such a beautiful, vibrant picture. You talk about being educated from the school of hard knocks. Do you want to
Right.
tell one or two stories?
Absolutely. So, I mean, the thing for me is like this fine balance between school in, the formal sense and the school of hard knocks, because I was very lucky to excel academically from an early age. I just loved reading. I mean, I just I don't have any memories of me being a kid where I didn't have a book in my hand or a book in my book bag. I just was always obsessed with reading. And when I got to like the third, fourth, fifth grade, every year I won the New York State Championship for the storytelling, the National Storytelling Contest, which would come. And at the state level, in the New York State Championship, I won probably like 4 or 5 years consecutive in a row. And this was intense. Like you have to memorize word for word the words in a book, a kid's book. So like Anansi the Spider, I remember I did one year. And there's a panel of judges, 5 or 6 adults, librarians, and superintendents and things, and they're all sitting in front of you in a row of chairs with a physical copy of the book. And they're reading the words as you are reciting them out loud. And of course, you can't just say the words, you got to perform the book. You got to bring it to life. You can make different voices for the different characters. And I loved it. I memorized the different book every year. I brought home the trophy. We would go all the way up to Albany on a bus from Brooklyn. And it was such a big thing. And that for me is an early memory of how much I just loved books and I loved reading. And that pretty much carried me through, my high school and college years. So I got a scholarship to Brown. I talk about the experience in the book being really, I would say, foundational, fundamental to who I am today. Like, I don't think I would be the person that I am today if I didn't get plucked out of Brooklyn and placed onto this beautiful campus at Brown. But the challenges that came with that, learning a lot of things through experience and through talking to people and not really getting a formal education. So the one example that, that I talk about in the book was getting in trouble with credit cards. I never saw an adult in my life use a credit card. I never really saw my parents use debit cards. I think when my sisters and brothers were teenagers and I was in elementary school still, I did see them. They had debit cards, but my parents never had debit cards. They never wrote a check. They never had, bank accounts or anything like that. So when it was time for me to go off to college and start figuring things out, I didn't want to bother them because I knew that they didn't really have money. So instead of talking to them about, Mom, I don't have money for textbooks, or, I need a laptop and I don't have the money, I just didn't want to burden them. I knew they were already stressed and they've always, struggled with money. So I just went and got a credit card on my own. And I felt good about that. Like I for some reason felt like an accomplished adult because there was a shiny plastic card with my name on it, and I could handle my, financial troubles without having to rely on mom and dad. And of course, I thought I knew what I was doing. I would pay my minimum payment due every month on time, but all the rest of the remaining balance was accruing interest at a really high rate. Student credit cards are some of the highest interest rates in the country, higher than small business owners pay for credit card interest rates, higher than, new to credit or poor credit individuals. If you're a student, you get the highest rates. So I was paying upwards of 24, 25% interest on my credit cards. And that's how I ended up with, $20,000 by the time I graduated. Super high interest rate credit card debt across 4 different credit cards that were all near to maxed out, if not maxed. Some of them were maxed out and almost all of them were. So I just sort of learned through making mistakes, really, what it is that you should avoid doing, because I did it and learned how bad it is because my credit score was just awful. It was hard for me to get an apartment. There were things that I couldn't figure out how did I get into this situation? Then as I started backpedaling and looking at all the steps that I took, I realized it was through a lot of mistakes by spending money I didn't have and not having a plan in place for how I was actually going to pay it back and when.
Was part of this driven by trying to fit into Brown and the type of students who were there, and maybe some of them came from higher socioeconomic families?
Definitely, it was driven by being surrounded by very wealthy or children of very wealthy peers. I don't want to call my peers wealthy because they, their parents were giving them the money. Their parents were wealthy. Um, and in contrast, my parents, were barely able to help me. I had to actually take a piece of my paycheck and send it to my mom and dad. And when I would go home for Thanksgiving or Christmas break, I would give my mom and dad $50, cash, whatever from my account that I could give them. While the reverse was happening for my peers, like their parents were, putting money into their checking accounts so that they could access it with their debit cards. And so definitely I felt like I knew I was different and I didn't want to seem even more odd than I already was. So I think that in my psychology, my thought process was, let me do whatever I can to try to fit in as much as possible so that they don't realize just how different I am, more so than the obvious signs. Like I talk different, I act different, I walk different. There's a lot of different, I talk with my hands, there's things that we are all not going to be able to deny about me being different, but let me not be even more odd than I have to be here. So I definitely use credit cards to fit in visually. Like, I bought things that would make me look the part. So So I bought Uggs, I bought a MacBook, I bought a Coach bag, I bought all these expensive things so that I just looked like another kid on campus, even though, deep down, I knew I wasn't just another one of them. I was really there, first of all, by the good graces of the scholarship fund that paid for my ride. My entire full ride was covered by the Sidney Frank family. So shout out to them. Sidney Frank scholarship program was put in place at Brown to pay for the neediest families who are accepted on blind admissions, but then based on need, wouldn't be able to pay the tuition. So I mean, super grateful for that. But ultimately, there are things outside of the scholarship that weren't covered that I had to kind of figure it out. My textbooks, my lab fees and school supplies, and decorating my dorm room, and just social life. There were so many things that I never thought about before I got there, and never thought, like, how am I actually going to pay for those things that are not covered by the tuition, the room and board, and the meal plan that I got from the scholarship program.
Wow. Folks, it is all in the book, and it is such a terrific read. What was it like to go back to Brown as a guest speaker?
Oh, so amazing. Well, it was mixed. It's a mixed bag, because you go back and it's amazing to feel like I'm able to reach back. I'm able to say, like, now that I'm out, now that I have like this perspective and I can look back in hindsight, I feel like I want to say so much. I want to tell you, like, avoid this, don't do that. There's so much that I want to share. But at the same time, it doesn't feel like the same place, because the people make the place, so being there around my friends and like the people who were there, like the dean that was there when I was there, and my professors that were there when I was there, a lot of the people on campus now, 10 plus years later, they're different people, different faces, and the different faces makes it feel like a different place. And so it definitely was a little weird. Like, it was sort of sad, even though it was dealing with nostalgia in like a good way, where I was like happy to be back. It also just felt like this isn't the same place. Like, you're not supposed to be there. And they changed a few of the eateries on campus and things, and some of the new dorms are up, and so it could definitely, you can tell it's not the same place, and it's changed a lot. It's got like a little bit of a facelift, but that feeling of like the memory of being there, living there, and the feelings that I had and the pressure that I felt, it comes right back once I'm on campus again. And I did go several different times to speak to students. One of the biggest events that I went back for to speak to was during senior week. There was a financial program that they wanted to put together for the graduating seniors. And there were like 55 students registered, but there were over 100 who showed up, which is amazing, and because they had heard, that I was going to come speak. And I did a presentation, and then the presentation was about 45 minutes. And then the remaining time was supposed to be about 20 to 30 minutes of questions. I was there an hour later, and there were still a bunch of kids there asking questions. So I think that the need for them to feel like they have a place to go to ask someone who's a near peer, enough so that like you get it, like you understand what I'm dealing with right now. So what would you do if you could go back and do things, my way? And so I got a lot of questions about balancing social life with academics. Dating and money was a big one that came up. Trying to find the balance between treating yourself because you work really hard, but then also saving and investing and thinking about the future. And so these constant decisions that are really, they're tough when you want to maximize for right now, but you can't fully do that when you have to also keep in mind that in a couple of months you have to pay a bunch of costs. Your cap and gown is expensive. Your senior photos are coming up, graduate. I mean, there's so much that you have to pay for. So I think that it's the perfect time to talk to them, like a couple months before graduation, so you can kind of check them and say, listen, it's gonna be really easy for you to just start taking on more debt now and think, oh, I already have this much, what's another 10,000 at this point? But it really is a big difference, especially with interest, and getting them to understand those fundamental lessons is critical at that age.
Scott, I would bet that Yanely would be in demand by every university in the country to do similar talks to similar students at a similar time. I mean, you are just so dynamic. I can only imagine how much the students got out of that.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta say, I love serving all students, especially, at the college level, because it's when I really needed an intervention myself. But most especially when I'm in front of first generation college students and first generation Americans who are the first in their family to go to college as well. For me, that first gen experience is such a huge part of who I am. I mean, you're sort of the scout, like you're going out to figure everything out before anybody else does, and then you bring it back and tell the rest of your family. So the first generation American, obviously, if my parents immigrated here in the 80s, I'm first generation in my family to go to college, first generation investor, first generation author. Like I think about all the ways that I'm doing something for the first time in my family and how big that is. And it can feel scary, but I think that when you position it as actually a badge of honor and position of empowerment, like you should feel empowered to be the first to do this and bring it back to your people, it can ease some of the fears I think that a lot of first gen students are feeling right now. So that's, I think, my jam is to be in front of first gen students and sharing my story with them.
God, I didn't think I could be any more impressed by Yanely, but I've just made more room to be more impressed with her. So,
Thank
Yanely, you
you.
graduate from Brown and then you
Yeah.
take a position as an elementary school teacher for Teach for America. What was that experience like?
Yeah. Oh, you grow up real fast. I went from like partying every weekend and hanging out with my friends to waking up at 5 in the morning, being in bed by 9 p.m. every night because otherwise you're exhausted. You just can't have the energy required to teach 32 plus 8-year-olds. Um, so yeah, I mean, things changed. My daily routine went complete 180. I mean, I just changed my everyday routines were different. The time that I was going to sleep, waking up, I mean, these major changes happened super fast. Like probably about 5 weeks after I graduated, I was pretty much in intensive teacher training program. So in the summer, I taught kindergarten in Harlem, and that was for summer school to help like struggling readers catch up and hopefully be able to move on from kindergarten. And then when the fall came, I actually jumped right into being a third grade teacher. And during that time in New York City, there's a rule where you can't be a teacher if you don't have your master's, unless you're doing a transitional teaching master's program, so that you will, by the time you're done with your master's program in the first 2 years of teaching, you will have that master's. So I was actually teaching while doing my master's at the same time. And so I was going to school after I worked all day at the school. I would, get on the subway and go to my master's classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and sometimes on Saturdays as well. We had like 2 or 3 Saturday classes a month. And so it was intense. I mean, I felt like I didn't have any time off. I went from hanging out a lot and partying a lot to like now all of a sudden having no free time for myself, for my family, my boyfriend, my friends. And that takes a mental toll on you. Like you really have to have resilience and grit. And you have to also have a passion for what you're doing. Otherwise, you're going to give up and you're going to burn out. And there were moments of burnout, but ultimately, my kids, the students that I served were just so amazing, hilarious, brilliant, like so joyful, and you create this culture with them in your classroom where they feel more like family sometimes than your actual family, because you see them more, you spend more time with them, you're there all day with them. And so I loved teaching. I mean, I just felt in my element. The students and their parents, I had such close relationships with them. But the downside was not a lot of free time outside of teaching, because I taught at a very college prep intense charter network where the culture was very much you come in at 5 a.m., you leave at 5 p.m. and long school day, extended hours. And then of course, the summer was much shorter because you would have to come in earlier to do professional development and training and prepping and planning. Your scope and sequence had to be ready a whole 2 months before school started. I mean, they were very intense. And so I just very quickly I realized, okay, I think I'm feeling like I'm exhausted and the pay wasn't that great. So I compared myself to some of my friends, on Wall Street or your C-suites or wherever they were working, fresh out of college. They were making multiple six figures in corporate jobs, working similar hours to me or worse hours, but making significantly more money. And so I was like, okay, this doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. I'm going to work myself to the bone and make $40,000 a year. And then where I could, become a teacher trainer or become a principal, but then, even those types of positions are capped at a certain amount of money and you're working all the time and you're exhausted and you're drained. So I pretty much 2-3 years into teaching knew, okay, I have to figure out my pivot. What is going to be my pivot? Because as much as I love this, I have to think about other ways to use my skills, to do something that's going to be a bit more sustainable for me.
Wow, you have so well described teaching. And I cannot believe that you did all of that also as a first year teacher.
Yes.
Teaching is hard, but that first year is it's almost impossible.
Yeah. It's definitely the hardest. I mean, you're just learning so much on the job and and one thing I will say, if to anybody who's wanting to be a teacher or new teachers in particular who are listening, the one thing, if I could go back in time and do that first year again, I would demand, demand that administration in my school building give me 1 to 2 days a week in the morning where I have 20 minutes that they come into my class and watch my students for my morning routine, whether that's morning math, whether that's breakfast routine, whatever that is, that they give me 20 minutes so I could take my clipboard and pop out into a veteran teacher's classroom and observe. If I could do that once to twice a week, my first year teaching, oh my God, I think I might have still been in the classroom 5, 6, 7 years later, because that first year learning curve, things would have looked so differently if I had, had direct access to veteran teachers and been able to observe them and take notes. The first 6 weeks of that first year would have been huge. So yeah, anybody listening in education, that will be a game changer for new teachers.
I'll take it one step further. My idea is that as a first year teacher, you're paid full salary, but you only work half a day. And so maybe you
Ooh,
hire 2 teachers to do this. You spend that half a day that you're not with students doing exactly what you're saying.
yes,
I would almost bet that the attrition rates would be reduced because of that. This is
100%
an
they would.
impossible job. We are asking people to do
Yeah.
an impossible job. I did it for 10 years and I felt many of those feelings that you expressed, that exhaustion, but also joy at the culture I could build, the relationships I could build with student and parents. And I miss that. But especially at my age now, there's just no way I could go back and do that.
I know. And it's so sad. It's like this, it was hard to leave. It was very hard to leave teaching. I mean, when I told my students I wasn't coming back,
Oh,
I was crying more than them. I mean, it was because it's such a tough decision. You love it, but you also recognize how unsustainable it can be. And, obviously every school is different. I have multiple siblings that are still working in education. One of my sisters is the head of the math department at one of the largest high schools in New York City, and through. I mean, loves her work. She works all the time. On a Thursday night at 7 p.m., I'll give her a call. She's like, I'm just leaving my school now. So those are the types of people who are so committed that end up staying and being, lifers and really working in the system to support students. It's unfortunate that they have to do that, that it has to look that way in order for it to be for you to have a really long tenure. But it definitely is the most interesting combination of joy and love for what you do, but also feeling exhaustion and that it's unsustainable and that you may need to pivot. And it can be definitely confusing, I think, for a lot of people in the profession.
I'm going to turn it over to Scott in a moment, but one last question from me. Did you have a 403B when you were teaching?
I did. I was so lucky. My charter school network had a Vanguard 403B. I mean, come on, the dream, right? I will tell you, I had no idea what a 403B was. I was 23 years old. And they brought us all together into a meeting and they said, okay, everybody, today we're doing benefits. You get to look at your medical, your dental, your vision. You get to look at, all of the different, the life insurance policy that you get, all these things. And then the 403B paperwork. And if you want to sign up for that retirement plan, you have to submit the papers by Friday, to the HR person. Everybody starts filling things out, flipping through the pages. And I'm just like, were they speaking a foreign language or am I the only one who doesn't understand what the heck they just said? But the one teacher that I was co-teaching with for a lot of the time during the day, she was sitting next to me. She kind of took me up under her wing and had, taught me about behavior management and, systems for routines and systems for the classroom. So I felt a connection to her and I knew she had been great. So I saw her filling out the paperwork pretty much right away. And I've never cheated on a test. I swear you all, on a code. I'm not that kid who cheated. I would help my friends out, but I wouldn't copy answers. I copied every single one of her answers on the paper. And to this day, I remember just looked like really squinting over her shoulder to see what she was writing. And she was bubbling in moderately aggressive, mutual, moderately aggressive, right? And she was bubbling these 7%. So I know that at the age of 23, having no clue what I was doing, I was contributing 7% to my 403B with Vanguard to moderately aggressive mutual funds or index funds. And they had target date funds on there too. But I remember seeing them, 2055, 2065, but I didn't choose those. I copied her and I just went with, moderately aggressive and at 7%, which I mean, for a first year teacher to put 7% of their salary into a 403B and be putting moderately aggressive, mix of some bonds, but a lot of stocks, that's freaking great, especially with fees as low as the ones being offered at Vanguard.
I love that story. That's I also like that you could actually designate a percentage. So many teachers have to put in a dollar amount. And as you talk about in your book, when you're putting in a dollar amount, you're not actually increasing the amount that you're contributing every year because it's a flat dollar, not a percentage. And that
That's
percentage, when you get raises, you're actually contributing extra to your account.
great
So
point.
before I get to my questions, you keep talking about a pivot, and like you're here now, so that's the pivot. But so what was that pivot, and how did you how did you get into doing what you're doing now?
Yeah. Oh man. Okay. So I knew I made the decision, in my heart, my gut. I was like, I'm not going to be teaching next year. It's not happening. So what am I going to do? So I just went on LinkedIn and I went on all these different websites and I started looking at the types of jobs that existed that were people who had education training. So they had went through their, either started as teachers or had a master's in education like I did, had that sort of similar background to me academically, but were working somehow in more of like the business side of things. Because I knew, okay, I want to start, getting into business, but my background's in education. I had to somehow, get those mend those two together. So I started looking at jobs and I saw a lot of like tutoring centers, learning centers. And I was like, okay. So if I was to run a learning center, I'm using my academic skill set and my training, but, collecting tuition. So now you're learning about, running a business, marketing the center, having to do, administration of the actual, scheduling and things. So I was like, okay, I could kind of learn about the business side of things, running a business through like a tutoring center, but also the nature of the work is rooted in the education and the academic stuff that I do feel is right in my wheelhouse. So that's what I did. I pivoted right into after school learning center. I became the director of a center in Midtown Manhattan that had 400 students. A majority of those students were there on a subsidy. So free and reduced lunch students whose families applied for some type of discounted tuition at the center. And we did math and reading after school and on weekends. And I would, plan out their little trajectory for the lessons that they would do and the types of, repetition that they needed, what level they were at. I would assess them every now and then I would, obviously collect the tuition from the parents and call to remind them and host events to market the center and try and get new clients and new families. And so I did that for 2 years. And even though I really liked it because it was a new set of skills that I didn't have before, or that, I hadn't been practicing those muscles or learning about how to do those things, it didn't feel as joyful as teaching in the classroom. It felt like it was just too rigorous, too like the day in and day out felt like minutia. It was like, okay, I'm doing the same thing the same way every day. It's starting to feel like I don't feel excited to come to the center when I wake up in the morning like I did to the classroom. I would wake up and I'd be excited to come to my school, but I was exhausted, but I still wanted to go, right? So with the center, I lost passion pretty much within the first 12 to 18 months. But again, it was a really big eye-opening experience because I was learning about financials, paying the bills for a center, understanding the tuition that I was the rent that I was paying to have a space like that. Now, the cool thing is I didn't have to buy the center. I didn't have to go in financially on it. This was a franchise center that was actually owned by the company, and they hired me as a director. So I was very much able to just jump in there and learn from everything without having to put a lot of my own capital in. I was just a paid full-time employee. And there I had a 401k. So I was able to just like roll over my old 403b into that 401k and, just kind of keep building my career kind of more in the private side. But it was definitely an easy shift over from teaching because the skill sets from teaching came in, but again, very quickly I lost passion and I realized, okay, what's going to be next here? And I would go home and just feel like I didn't have like, I don't know, like it just felt like I didn't have that excitement. So I went home one day and I just made a YouTube video and I was like, you know what, I'm just going to post a video talking about what I am passionate about. Cause I work all day, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. and I don't feel excited about what I do there. So let me just go home, make a video about what I do feel excited about. And then maybe that'll allow me to continue to sustain this job a little longer. And so that's when I started YouTubing because I was desperately seeking something that I was passionate about outside of work.
Dan and I have watched a lot of your YouTube videos, and you talk about how a lot of things that you learned, like you talk about how you learned eyebrow threading from YouTube,
I did.
all these other things from YouTube. And like for me, that was so foreign because like I thought YouTube was like for entertainment purposes. And then my kids started using YouTube for like learning things, like they didn't know how to do something. So they look up on YouTube. They didn't, couldn't figure something out. So they looked it up on YouTube, and like, it's become this source. I mean, it's got its problems, but it's also become its source for not just entertainment, but for really learning how to do things. And you have tapped into that in such a way that, I mean, Dan and I find both entertaining and educational. And I think that's the key to what you do. Is it's not this boring, place that people have to go and listen to some person talk. It's just, they want to come and listen to you because it's so interesting. I keep getting away from the questions I want to ask. I was going to ask, but like, how did this evolve to where you are today? You did one video,
Yep,
and then you did another video, and then you did another video, and then what happened?
yeah. I was getting so many emails. So I created this little email, right? MissBeHelpful@gmail.com. And, the channel name was MissBeHelpful. So I was like, if you have questions or if you have a topic you want me to cover, just email me to MissBeHelpful@gmail.com. And I put that at the end of all my little videos. I definitely didn't think I was going to be getting emails from people, maybe just a couple of people who saw a video and had a question or something. But I was getting so many emails. Like within the first 2-3 months, I got dozens of emails from people saying, I haven't seen any other videos talking about this. Like, your video is so important. This is so helpful. Will you come to a workshop in person about this topic? And I was like, what? Like, this is wild that a video that I posted on YouTube is now leading me, like, it's lead gen to a whole bunch of people coming to me and asking me to do more services, to offer workshops in person, to do a virtual presentation for their company, to come to the school, university, and present to the students. I mean, it just led to this whole other line of work that I didn't even think about that I could do. So, for me, it came naturally from the audience that came to my YouTube channel. And one in particular was an invitation to join a podcast as a guest speaker. That podcast was the NGPF podcast, which is specifically targeting all of the teachers that use the free curriculum provided by Next Gen Personal Finance on their website. And I didn't even know that there was a financial literacy curriculum. So when they sent me that email, I was like, wait, your organization offers curriculum to teachers? I used to be a teacher and I never saw financial literacy incorporated into any of the lessons, in any of the scope and sequence, any of the departments or planning or prep. No one talked about money. So what's this all about? So I joined them on the podcast. I spoke with Tim, the founder or the co-founder of NGPF. Tim Ranzetta had me on as a guest. We did this podcast, and probably 2 or 3 days after the podcast conversation, I had an email in my inbox from him again. And he was just like, Yanely, I just can't stop thinking about our conversation. And I just can't just like let that conversation go. Like, we have to do something. We have to keep working together in some way. Let's come up with, brainstorm some ideas. Let's jump on a phone call, if you're open to it. And at that time, I was in Barcelona because I had stopped teaching. I had stopped working at the organization that I was working at. So at this point, this was like my third job out of college. So I was teaching, then I worked at the private education center, and then I worked at another nonprofit doing literacy intervention. I did that for about 2 or 3 years. And then at that point, I was like, okay, I know I don't want to keep doing this work, but I don't know what I want to do next. But my YouTube channel was starting to take off. I had like about 20 or 30,000 subscribers, and I was getting, significant amount of money from it. So I was like, okay, maybe I should just pause, because when you don't really know what to do, the wisdom is usually like to not do anything, to just wait until you know what to do. So I took that summer. It was the summer of 2018. And I went to Barcelona with my boyfriend, and he had been working remotely since before remote work was a thing. He's been working in tech forever. So he's like working on his laptop, and I'm journaling and creating a new logo for MissBeHelpful, and like thinking about what I wanted, what different workshops I want to offer. And like, what are my services? Am I going to do in-person workshops more? Just keep doing videos, private custom videos. I was coming up with all these ideas. And then I got another message from Tim, and he said, I really think that you should work at NGPF. And I was like, I don't know, man. I don't know. Cause I'm over here trying to design my life around what I want to do. And he's like, but well, then why don't you tell me what you want to do? And then I told him, I said, well, I want to be talking to students. I want to be in front of students. I want to support teachers. I want to really advance financial literacy in a formal way. So I want standardized, like I want to standardize financial literacy, and I want to make sure that there's a core set of standards. He's like, oh, did you know that there are standards? And I was like, no. So he sent me standards, and he's like, we could work on creating activities. You can make videos. You could serve students. You could serve teachers. Like all the things you want to do, we could craft a role around that for you. And I think it could be beneficial for both NGPF and you and MissBeHelpful. And I was sold. I was like, okay, you know what? This sounds like something at least I could try out, and if I don't love it, whatever, we go our separate ways. That was in August of 2018. I started my first week on the job. It's 2023 and I'm still working at NGPF and I love it. And I love it. I will be honest, MissBeHelpful has definitely taken a lot more time, only more time, not less. So I'm now down to a couple less hours per week dedicated to NGPF, as much as, when you compare it to how much I was working in 2018 towards NGPF. So the breakdown of my commitment in terms of my hours for my own business versus MissBeHelpful versus NGPF looks different now. But the work that I'm doing is incredible. I get to do teacher trainings, create curriculum, and the advocacy work is truly what I'm most passionate about with NGPF, which is creating the data, the resources, and putting together, packets of information that we could share with teachers, with lawmakers, with state leaders, education leaders, to show them what this real argument is in favor of requiring a personal finance course for a full semester at the state level, and doing that in as many states, and hopefully all 50 states by 2030, because that's, the mission for NGPF. But really just, I couldn't have put it better myself in terms of what mission am I working towards with MissBeHelpful. It felt like NGPF got to it first. They already had the mission. They had a name for it. They had a clear plan, a strategic, so why would I go off and try to recreate the wheel when I could team up with NGPF and work towards that exact mission that I would have put in place myself anyway. So that's kind of what it felt like, the perfect partnership. And so that's how I ended up at NGPF, and I'm still there now.
Well, your energy is infectious, and I'm sure it's one of the many things that helps drive NGPF. We've met so many great people there. Yes. Any updates on this, the goal of having personal financial literacy taught in all 50 states by 2030?
So at the time of this conversation, so this is mid-June 2023, breaking news, Louisiana just had an official bill signed into law by the governor there in mid-June, which made it the 22nd state to officially guarantee a full semester of personal finance to every high school graduate, which means we are so close to 25, which would be half of the states in the US, not half of America, because population versus number of states, but in terms of just number of states, we're at 22. So we are so close to getting half of the states to get this requirement. And the goal would be that by the year 2030, just 7 years away as of 2023, to have all 50. So we would need to, get a lot done in the coming 5 to 6 to 7 years. But that's not impossible. One of the things that I love that Tim always says, our co-founder at NGPF always says to folks, when you think about how long it took for the US to announce that our goal was to land on the moon, and to when we actually did it, it was like 9 years. So for us to say we can't get this done, we've done significantly more difficult things that seemed impossible in a similar amount of time. So where there's a will, there's a way, and the data is there to support this, and people have a passion. Parents support it, students support it. Every adult I've ever met says, I wish I had a class about financial literacy. It's kind of common sense at this point. So what we need to do is rally folks who have power and who, are in positions of leadership to say what needs to happen in order for this to get done. Let's make it happen.
So NGPF is the NASA of financial literacy.
Yes, I love this.
Let's see, that makes you a financial literacy astronaut or engineer, one of those two.
I like it. I'm going to call myself financial literacy astronaut from now on.